Hi and hello, my name is Dave. Welcome to my channel where I mumble on about books that nobody reads. So here we are, middle of February, past the middle of February, and I've finally gotten around, motivated myself, convinced myself it's the right thing to do to kind of do a reading wrap up. I used to do, if you look at my old videos, I used to do individual book reviews, but I don't know, it just not feeling that anymore. But I have been watching some of the kind of the monthly wrap-ups that Nick does and Brian over at Bad Taste Books, and I kind of like that format, so I think I'm going to steal that and give it a shot. Now, a couple of caveats: I don't have anywhere near the eloquence of Jake over at Pulp Mortem, so this is not going to be anywhere nearly as entertaining as his videos. Certainly do not have the unbridled enthusiasm of Nick at the Book Graveyard. So you're going to be stuck with my monochromatic delivery probably, and I also don't have that, I don't know, scholarly sageness of Grammaticus over at Grammaticus Books. So this may just be a complete disaster, but there's only one way to find out, and that's to try it and see how bad it sucks. So yeah, I'm gonna do a January wrap up, but I'm gonna cheat a little bit and sneak back into December, because there are a couple of books there that I read during that month that I really want to talk about for various reasons. So first up, I finished a series. There were 2 books out of 4, so I read the last 2 books in this 4-book series, and I was first turned on to this series by Nick. It might have been spring, maybe summer of last year, when he showed the first book in the series, Silver Glass. And he just the things that he said about that book made it very interesting to me. It's a fantasy novel, and he was just kind of giggly over some of the content, so I thought, why not? And I picked up that first book, and it was all right. It didn't blow me away, but it was enough. It was done well enough that I wanted to keep reading, and so I did. Now, what I ended up doing in December was reading the 3rd book, which is The Witch of Rostchill, something like that. And I think Brian over at Bad Taste Books just showed this in his one of his hauls. So this is, like I said, the 3rd book. It's printed in '89 Ace paperback. It's got this, the cover is by Luis Royo. It's got this nice wraparound cover, which is pretty cool. And yeah, well, you know what? Before I get into the whole series, let's just go to the next one, and the final one, and that is The Mistress of Ambiguities. And these are all by J.V. Rivkin. J.F. Rivkin. I always want to say J.V. for whatever reason. So J.F. Rivkin. This cover is by Jean Target, I think his name is, and maybe it's her name, I don't know. This is again an Ace paperback from '91. This does not have a wraparound. So yeah, the series basically follows 2 main characters. There's Corson, who is the blonde swordswoman barbarian sort of character, and then Nictasia, who is in the D&D world, she'd be kind of a wizard, mage, thief sort of character. She is an aristocrat in a ruling class family that has its factions within it, and she's the heir, but she's also kind of the black sheep. And there's a lot going on in this world with not only her family, but they've got several, I don't know, feuds with other ruling families. Think kind of Game of Thrones, but not nearly as complex or intricate or interesting. But anyway, that's the kind of premise. That's what's going on. She spends the series kind of trying to escape that life, going on a number of adventures, encountering people from her past, long lost relatives from her present, future, whatever, ending up having to come back and deal with stuff that's going on in the city and her inheritance. And of course, all the while, her and Corson are butting heads, but always coming back together. It's one of those kind of buddy buddy stories, I guess. And like I said, it was fair. It wasn't bad. Now the author, I'd never read anything from that they'd written before, and it turns out that's because it's not just a pseudonym, but it's a pseudonym of two unnamed female authors. And according to the publisher and Encyclopedia of Science Fiction and Fantasy, one is from the East Coast, one is from the West Coast. Who wrote which parts of the book, who knows? And it really, what they've done outside of this, again, I couldn't find anything about it anywhere on the internet. So who's to say? But anyhow, overall, it was a decent series. It's not something that's going to blow you away. It's a little bit vulgar. There's quite a bit of sexual innuendo. There's some sexual activity that happens. It's mostly off page. There's definitely an LGBTQ interaction between some of these characters, and so there's a lot of different, and I think at the time probably pretty unique dynamics. So that was interesting. But overall, I gave the series probably 2.5 out of 5 stars, just because it was okay. It was average. It was enjoyable, but it's not something that really sticks in the mind. You know what I'm talking about. And another thing, as far as the covers go, so this cover and the 2 previous books basically had the same concept, where Corson is seemingly the predominant character in the forefront of the art. Whereas in reality, in the story, she's not. She's more of just a hanger-on almost. I mean, she contributes obviously, but she's not the character that the story is built around. Whereas this cover finally gets it close to right, where she's plays a background character, but then I don't think the representation of Nictasia is quite exactly what the book describes, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, that's my take on the Silverglass series, and love to hear if you've read about it, Brian. If you've read yours yet, or Nick, if you've moved on beyond the original, the first book, I'd love to hear from it. So let's move on to the next thing, shall we? All right, next up for December, I read Thomas Burnett Swan's How Are the Mighty Fallen? And this was published by Daw. They're number 94 in 74 with the cover. That cover's by George Barr. Now, this is the second book I've read by Swan. The first one was Will-o'-the-Wisp, which I really enjoyed, and I really dug his take on juxtaposing modern religion and the old ways. So I was very interested in reading more by Swan. And so this was the next one I picked up, and this was similar, though very, very different. So really this is, okay, so this, I would consider this to be biblical fantasy. This is centered on the story, basically leading up to, during, and just after David's encounter with Goliath. And that's really kind of it's a main plot point, but it's really a story about David's relationship with Saul's son Jonathan. And but stepping back just a little bit, Swan also takes the direction that Jonathan and his mother Ahinoam were not human. They were actually sirens from the island of Crete, and Goliath himself was a cyclops. So the world being the way it was back then, apparently, Jonathan and his mother had to hide their identity because of the repercussions. They would either be caged or killed, or maybe both, to appease Yahweh. Whereas Goliath, who allied himself with the Philistines, found no such issues because the Philistines were much more accepting of people unlike them, or things apparently unlike them. So that's one of the themes of the book. The other theme that was so controversial that it actually almost got this book not published by Daw. And today, especially in the United States, if the ruling class knew of this novel's existence, would certainly cause it to be banned, was the assertion that Swan makes that Jonathan and David were actually lovers. Now, the Bible does hint at this, but Swan leaves no doubt whatsoever. And so that's the central theme of the story, is how they mask their relationship, how they endure with one another while they're under all of these pressures to that's, you know, obviously forbidden among the Israelites. Now, when the Philistines learn about it, they're just like, yeah, well, what? So what? So, you know, again, there's that whole juxtaposition between acceptance, tolerance, and Puritanism, which Swan dives into totally into the deep end in this book. So, you know, honestly, biblical, really anything is not my bag. So thematically based, the story was just not something that I was invested in. But Swan is a very accomplished writer. His prose is very poetic and easy to read and enjoyable. So I still found myself, you know, turning these pages with ease and really, you know, in absorbing the story. So if that sounds interesting to you, or if you want to get in on the ground floor of a book before it gets banned again, you might want to check this one out. I give it like a 2.5 stars, just because, again, it's well written, but it's just not a story that I connected with. But anyway, this is Thomas Burnett Swan's How Are the Mighty Fallen? All right, and that was it for December. So let's talk about the things that went on in January. First up was a book that I showed in a haul, I think maybe the December's haul. One I was definitely putting at the top of my priority list for 2025, and I did get to that. And that is The Grimm Company by Luke Scull. And this was published in 2013 on Rock. And so yeah, this is first in a 3-part trilogy. Obviously, it's a trilogy, it's 3 parts, but it's a fantasy, dark fantasy. It takes place in this world that the gods have been destroyed or killed. They've fallen to Earth, or whatever planet this world is on, whatever. And wherever they land, or wherever their bodies fell, their essence essentially created or manifested magic in its physical form. So a group of mage lords had eradicated the gods, and they have now kind of divvied up the world into their own city-states, and each is controlling an area of magic where a god fell. And they would mine this magic, because magic, although it is inherent, you know, not everyone has the ability to use magic. Everyone who is able to use magic only can do minor parlor trick sort of things. But with this divine essence, this physical manifestation of pure magic, they're able to absorb that power and then become, you know, not only powerful wizards, but also immortal. So there's fun in that. And of course, as you would have it in these types of novels, the mage lords aren't happy with their little slices of the world, so they decide to, you know, get in everybody else's business. So enter a swordsman, aging swordsman named Brodar Kane. He's essentially a barbarian. He's come down from the Highlands with his blood brother Jarek the Wolf, and you know, yeah, think Vikings. I mean, they definitely are a pattern on the Vikings. Now, what I really enjoyed about Brodar Kane is, yes, he is a very powerful swordsman, very strong, very skilled, but the dude's in his mid-50s. And so he, you know, he's waking up every morning arthritic. His eyesight is fading. So when Jarek calls out, you know, riders on the ridge, seeing them through Broder's eyes, they're just kind of like blurry shapes up on the ridge. He can't really he can't really see like he used to as a young man. So, you know, and then his wounds from years past are causing him pain all the time. He you know, throughout whatever, however he happens to be exerting himself, he tires pretty easily compared to people he's with. So there's that realism that was really something that I count as a pro for this book. But anyway, so what's happening is Jarek and Broder have come down to a city-state called Darminia, which is ruled by a tyrant mage lord, of course. And there's a rebel faction within the city that is trying to overthrow this mage lord, but they've got, you know, they got nothing, right? And Broder and Jarek manage to get themselves intertwined with this rebellious activity, and it goes from there. So what I really enjoyed about this book, and I did really enjoy this book, this I'm going to spoil it right now. It's a 4 out of 5 stars for me. You know, 5s only go for the Lord of the Rings trilogy, The Hobbit, even, you know, Song of Ice and Fire. So 4 is about, you know, unless it's an absolute classic in my mind, 4 is as high as it's going to get. But anyway, this reads a lot like a dark fantasy Forgotten Realms novel. And the author, Luke Scull, who's a British dude, he admits, or not admits, but he mentions in some of his interviews and things like that he is a fan of the Forgotten Realms novels and things like that. But it reads that way in terms of some of the just the plot points, some of the tropes. But what sets this apart, what because I used to enjoy the Forgotten Realms, but to me that's more YA. This is definitely dark fantasy. I mean, it is vulgar. It is grim. I mean, it's right there in the title. It's bloody. It's occasionally offensive. There's some snarky humor to it, which is cool. We all love that. And of course, in addition to what I talked about with how Broder is characterized, it also deals with some issues relating to like substance abuse and addiction, sexual violence, domestic abuse. He really doesn't pull a lot of punches. Now, there's nothing really graphic. I mean, some of the fight scenes, some of the bloodletting is kind of graphic, squished heads and things like that. But the other stuff, there's no graphic sex. There's you know, things are implied, but it's if it does happen, it happens off page. But it's more real, it's more dark, and I enjoy that in fantasy. And the characters themselves, not just Broder and Jarek, but all the other characters that come into play, they're not a single one of them is one-dimensional. Now, as the story goes, there are multiple parallel plot lines, which again, think of Song of Ice and Fire. It's that same kind of thing. We're in one chapter, we're here, in another chapter, we're in this part of the world, another chapter, we're in this part of the world, following this third character, and they're all intertwined, and in the end, they do reconnect. But as these parallel plot lines are underway, and we're focused on a different character or set of characters in each one, the author really does a good job, I think, of building out their characters. Now, there are, you know, he spoon feeds us things from each of their backstories. We don't get to know these characters from page one. They as the story progresses, so too do we learn more about them. And the backstories are definitely believable. And like I said, these characters are multi-dimensional. You have good characters that do bad things. Absolutely. And then there are the characters that you just know that this is the villain. I'm going to hate this person. But then they, you know, there's something about either their private life or something they do that's unexpected that is good. It's really well, I think, developed in terms of the characters. It's well written. Great pacing. There's always something going on. I just really enjoyed this story. Now, it's not perfect, obviously. a couple of things that kind of bothered me where there were some Deus Ex Machina sort of conveniences that occurred, which would take me out of the story for a moment. You know, I'd have to put it down and maybe come back to it later, pick it up. But it wasn't that there was no trouble getting back into the story, getting back into being enveloped into the story. And so those moments were few, but you know, they were enough to be a little bit jarring. The conclusion, again, I try not to spoil anything, but all I will say is that some characters died, some didn't. But it didn't really seem, it was kind of like a anticlimactic climax, okay? It didn't seem like everything or enough had been resolved, which sort of makes sense because, again, this is a trilogy, so there's going to be a book two, or there's a book two, which I'm currently reading. But I just, you know, typically in these fantasy trilogies, you usually, there's a major overarching conflict, and then there's a minor, not a minor, but a less major conflict that gets resolved at the end of that book. And it was there, but it just didn't feel, I don't know. It's hard to describe it. I just didn't feel that full sense of resolution. And I also didn't feel, it didn't end on a cliffhanger. So there wasn't something that really compelled me to go into book two. Now, like I said, I already am reading book two because this was really well written and I want to follow this through. But I can see how people could drop off after the first end of the first book. But nevertheless, I'm going to keep going on it, and I highly recommend it. If you're a fan of dark fantasy and you haven't read Luke Scull's Grim Company, give this one a shot. I think this will be very pleasing. All right, now let's move on to some science fiction. So I also mentioned in one of my previous haul videos that I wanted to make a point of getting back into SF this year, and I had chosen to do so by getting into Lee Brackett's The Ginger Star series. I already had the second book in the series on the shelves, so I went out and I got the first book, The Ginger Star. And this is a Ballantine book published in 1974. Oh, and this is a Jim Steranko, I think is how you pronounce his name, cover. And so yeah, gave this one a whirl. Now, you know, with Lee, and another reason I chose is not just because I had that on the shelf. I got some other sci-fi on the shelf as well, but I mean, Lee Brackett had written a number of science fiction novels and short stories, and was actually, I guess, dubbed the queen of the space opera, and that's really what I was looking for. I wanted a good space opera to get back into it. I mean, she also wrote a couple of crime novels, and I think even a Spur Award-winning Western, none of which I've checked out. So this is the first Brackett book that I have read. But this basically tells the story of a dude named Eric John Stark. And throughout this entire book, I don't know why, but every time I saw Eric John Stark on the page, my mind saw John Carter of Mars. And maybe, just maybe, that has something to do with the fact that this Eric John Stark, he's a human who was born on Mercury, in a mining colony on Mercury, but his parents were killed in a mining accident. In fact, the actual entire mining colony was destroyed, except for Eric John Stark. He was orphaned and not basically, but absolutely alone human-wise. But he was taken in by the Aborigines of Mercury, who were obviously not human, but they were kind of they had their own society. They're very feral, just step up in that evolutionary cycle from animal. They had a language. You get where I'm saying. So they raised him as their own. He developed some animalistic skills and senses based on that, and eventually this dude named Simon Ashton arrived along with some other humans to investigate what happened to the mining colony, and this is years later, and found Stark as a child, a young adolescent, and brought him back to Pax. I'm not sure if that's Earth. I haven't figured that out yet, but that's the center of the galactic empire is a planet called Pax. Brought him back. Now he was treated again as a curiosity, an oddity. He was caged. He was observed almost like an animal in a zoo until Ashton said enough is enough, adopted him, civilized him, taught him English and how to behave as a human behaves. And so, yeah, if you're thinking Tarzan, it's essentially Tarzan. So, got that dynamic at work here. So, now where this book actually picks up is Stark has landed on a planet called Skaith. And the reason he's there is to search for Simon Ashton, who, his foster father, who had gone missing sometime previously. He was there on a diplomatic mission to try to entice this planet to join Federation, Empire, whatever it's called. But communication ended, nobody heard from him, so now Stark is there to find him. At that point, it ends being a space opera and becomes a sword and planet story. This is a world that is very low tech, very isolationist. They are aware, sort of people from other planets now that it's populated by humans. There apparently was some technology in this planet's past that is all gone now. Some of it's buried, some of it's just mythological. They do have varying degrees of intentional mutations. There are some sea-dwelling humans, there are cave-dwelling humans, there are bird-like humans that were all at some point in this planet's history developed through intentional mutation. And then there are just regular run-of-the-mill humans. Now, weapon-wise, it's swords, it's daggers, it's clubs. There are some native fauna that is talked about, and that was pretty interesting. But by and large, most of the beings, the inhabitants of this planet, are some sort of mutated human form, or just regular humans. So yeah, this definitely was not what my anticipation of a space opera to be. It was definitely a sword and planet story where Stark lands, leaves a ship. It's only mentioned a few times after that. The people refer to outworlders as demons, not as human. And he just progresses through this planet looking for Ashton. But on the other hand, it was very well written. Brackett style is smooth, easy to read. It's told almost like a chronicle, I think. And what I mean by that is Brackett does well to describe what's happening, but she doesn't really describe the emotional feelings of the characters that are either doing or having things done to them. So so Stark doesn't really come off to me, and this is, I just couldn't really invest myself in his quest, because he comes off to me more as a hired hand with a job to do than somebody who's anxious to find what happened to the only family he knows and has really ever known. So that there wasn't that kind of level of engagement, I think. But again, things went well. There was some decent action. There was some decent tension. Overall, it was an enjoyable read. There were some plot conveniences, not too many. I mean, I think the biggest one, and this really isn't a spoiler because you're not going to know the context if you haven't read it. But Stark manages to develop telepathy, which, just boom, there it is. And how convenient, because it helps him get out of a situation and actually, moves the plot forward into book 2, which I'm actually in the middle of reading right now. So yeah, this was definitely a 2.5 out of 5. It's average. I don't know. I've heard, like I said, there's so much praise for Lee Brackett, but I'm not really, this one must be the runt of the litter. I don't know. So if you've read something from Lee Brackett that was space opera-ish and very, very good, please let me know. I'd love to hear about it. And I'm going to finish the series. It's only 3 books, I think. Maybe there's more. I can't remember if this was 3 or 4. It doesn't matter. I'm going to finish it just because I'm OCD that way. So, yep, The Ginger Star, Lee Brackett. All right, and this next book that I read in January was I knew of this book I've known of this book for a long time, and it's because it's based on a 1978 movie starring Laurence Olivier, Tommy Lee Jones, Robert Duvall, Catherine Ross, I think, and that's Harold Robbins' The Betsy. And now I haven't seen the movie, but I've known about it because it was filmed in the Detroit area, Grosse Pointe area specifically, and it's about well, we'll get into that in a minute. Well, no, that's what the hell. So it's like it's a family saga. I don't even really know how to categorize this kind of fiction. General fiction, historical fiction. I'm not sure. But before we do that, this man, I'm really screwing this segment up, aren't I? Jesus, it's not because I'm excited. I guarantee you that. This was originally published in 1971. My copy is Pocket Books 1972. There's a ton of different covers, and I'm going to probably scroll through them here on the side. But anyway, this tells the story. I've never read anything by Harold Robbins before, but this tells the story of the Hardiman family, who owns the Bethlehem Motor Car Company in Detroit. And they are, I mean, it's obvious that they're a stand-in for the Ford family. The 3 generations of Fords, and so it tells it's kind of like an NC-17 version of Knots Landing or Dallas or something like that. Starts out being told, or I guess it's told primarily or mostly from the viewpoint of Angelo Perino, who was a race car driver for the Hardiman family and the Bethlehem Motor Car Company, and he's ingratiated himself over the years with the patriarch, the founder of the company, and the guy who, raised himself up by his own bootstraps from nothing to found this company that's now made them all wealthy beyond imagination. And the old man, the patriarch, one last thing he wants to do is create a new kind of car. And again, this is in the late 60s when muscle cars ruled the road, but he wants to create a new one for his granddaughter, whose name is Elizabeth. So he wants to call it the Betsy, and he enlists Angelo Perino to do this for him, but he's got to fight his grandson, who is now the head of the company. Now, the patriarch still owns most of the stock and controls the board and things like that, but the day-to-day operations, the purse strings, are controlled by the grandson, and they are at loggerheads all the time. So that's it. It's kind of this family saga centered around the auto industry. Now, what's interesting, I guess kind of surprising now, like I said, I'd never read anything by Harold Robbins. I did a little research on him prior to picking the book up, and it turns out that, he was quite a bold author, definitely a storyteller. I mean, I guess early on when he was younger, he enlisted in the Navy when he was 15, so this is like in the 30s. And then would tell the story that he was the sole survivor of a submarine that had been torpedoed, which is admirable, except there were no U.S. submarines that were torpedoed in the 1930s. So the dude's a bullshitter, natural storyteller, and I guess he would carry that kind of through the rest of his life, talking about his relationships and people he knew and met and things like that. So the bullshit definitely fits into the story. It's some of it's over the top, and the man was apparently a very vulgar man, and that probably came as the biggest surprise to me, because when the book gets to its first sex scene, there ain't nothing held back. There's nothing left to the imagination. He writes his sex scenes extremely, extremely graphic. Now I'm putting that in the win column, so just so we're all on the same page. But just be aware that if you haven't read anything by Harold, well, of course I don't know if that's the way. I'm sure it's the way it's in everything else he's written. But if you haven't read the Betsy, be prepared for it. So yeah. Now I did like, and what drew me to this was the fact that it was written takes place in Detroit, and the author must have had at least passing familiarization with the Detroit area, because he got a lot of things right. Some of the things not so much, but he did get a lot of the things right. Some of the hotels and where they were located in relation to other various landmarks and things like that. Yeah, you could just look at a map, but still, there was a sense of authenticity. So I enjoyed that. I also enjoyed that it was about the automobile industry. Now, if you're not into cars, especially muscle cars, this might be a turnoff for you, but there's a lot of automotive detail and engineering detail when as the story progresses from not only the cars that are being raced and currently in production and just driven for leisure to the creation of the Betsy. So that for me that was interesting. Might not be very interesting for somebody who just doesn't dig that sort of stuff. So beware of that. Now, again, like I said, the writing style was very gripping for me. I was kept in the story, even though this really isn't, family sagas are really not sort of my bag. It does hop back and forth between timelines. In fact, one of the things that I didn't like about the book was that it starts out in the first person from Perino's perspective, and I totally dislike first person narrative. It's fine when it's in a genre that sort of requires it, like hard boiled crime or something like that. But typically I just don't dig it. But okay, I stuck with it, and then after a few chapters, it switched completely to third person, and now we're seeing things from various perspectives from people in the Hardiman family, and it kind of rolls like that through the rest of the book. And at the end, we switch back to Angelo, but again, it's third person. So I don't know if that's just kind of weird. I just had never encountered a book that switched perspectives like that. It worked, and maybe it worked for me because I don't like the first person. And once we got to the third person, I was like, okay, this I enjoy much better. I don't know. That may be a turnoff for some people, but for me, that kind of worked. There were some twists in the plot that were not that hard to foresee. He didn't really do a good job masking what was coming, what was right around the corner. There were a few things that were kind of surprising, but they were minor. They weren't really integral to the plot. So that was kind of disappointing. And I think the biggest thing that bothered me about this book is the level of misogyny is just over the top, even for being written in the Times. It really was. It was uncomfortable at some points. So if that's something that bothers you, you're gonna watch out for that. But overall, like I said, there especially when it did the flashbacks to the previous generations of the Hardiman family, there were aspects that really caught my attention, her historical events like the Battle of the Overpass. If you're not familiar with Ford Motor history and you think Henry Ford was a remarkable man, he was remarkable, but if you kind of hold him in a kind of high esteem, look up Battle of the Overpass. So Harold Robbins incorporated some of that local history, which to me, that's you win when you do that. But even with all that, I'm going to give this one just kind of a 2.5 out of 5. I maybe push it up to a 3 out of 5. It was okay, a little bit above average, I guess. And I don't know if I will pursue anything more by Harold Robbins, not on purpose anyway. I mean, he's written a number of books that have been adapted into film. So there must be something else going on. I don't know where this fits in his work. If anybody else is familiar with Harold Robbins and read something other than the Betsy, let me know what you think. Should I continue looking for his stuff, or just, if it happens to fall in my lap, just wait for that. But we'll see. So yeah, the Betsy by Harold Robbins. Alrighty, the last book I have to talk about for the January reads is some nonfiction. So if this is not your bag, I feel free to bail out at this point. I really appreciate you sticking around. And if you continue to stick around, let's move on. And I'm talking about Napoleon's Invasion of Egypt by Jonathan North. And I think I brought this up in my December book haul. This was a gift from my wife. So yeah, Jonathan North is published in 2023 by Amberley Press. And Jonathan North is a historian who focuses primarily on the Napoleonic era. He's written a couple of books prior to this. I've not read any of them. But I was, as I mentioned in the hall, after seeing Napoleon, the film starring Joaquin Phoenix, I realized I didn't know much about Napoleon's time in Egypt. No, I've read a lot about his peninsular campaigns, Waterloo, all that kind of junk, but never really anything in Africa. So I picked this up with the purpose of learning. Well, I didn't pick it up. My wife, I put it on my gift list for my wife to pick up to learn more about that aspect. And this is an eyewitness history, which again, those are hit or miss. Where the author really focuses on letting the primary sources, letters, diaries, things like that, tell the story, and maybe wrapping it all around with a bit of overarching context, and that's what this is. But one key feature that was missing, or participant that was missing, was Napoleon himself. The author didn't rely on any of Napoleon's writings of or about or during that time. So it was all from the common foot soldier to a series of officers, to some civilian scholars who accompanied the expedition. That's really the meat of the story. And so while it really gave a clear picture of the shit that the rank and file had to endure during this expedition, the overall context, the strategy, the what Napoleon's anticipated results might have been, none of that was really touched on. It was kind of really briefly glossed over. So if you're looking for something really in depth, this is not it. But if you want to know how shit these guys got treated, and I mean, they were essentially abandoned, not just by France, but by Napoleon himself, and which was pretty shitty. But that really was worthwhile to read. So it was an okay book. I'm not going to star rate this because it's history. So it's I think it was well written. It's informative. Definitely learned something. But beyond that, it's all right. Well, that will wrap up my January reading wrap up. For those of you that stuck to the end, don't know why, but awesome. Thank you. I appreciate it. Kudos to you. If there were a prize, you definitely earn it. So until next time, I probably will do a book haul. Will be the next video come early March. And till I talk to you again, I hope you're doing well and I hope you stay well.